All right. Dhanavat Pranam. Namaste.
Namaste, Dhanavat Pranam.
I'm here with Srimati Kanupriya Devidasi, and we are continuing our reading of Hegel's Aesthetics, Volume 1.
Are you able to largen it just a tad? I haven't got my book with me.
Yes.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
A second way in which what is externally present can be for the spirit is in contrast to individual sense perception and the practical desire, the purely theoretical relation to intelligence. The theoretical study of things is not interested in consuming them, in their individuality and satisfying itself and maintaining itself sensuously by means of them, but in coming to know them in their universality, finding their inner essence and law, and conceiving them in accordance with their concept. Therefore, theoretical interest lets individual things alone and retreats from them as sensuous individuals, since this sensuous individualism is not what intelligence tries to study. For the rational intelligence does not belong to the individual person as such in the way that desires do, but to him as at the same time inherently universal. Inasmuch as man relates himself to things in accordance with his universality, it is his universal reason which strives to find itself in nature and thereby to re-establish that inner essence of things, which sensuous existence, though that essence is its basis, cannot immediately display. This theoretical interest, the satisfaction of which is the work of science, art does not share. However, in this scientific form, nor does it make it a common cause with the impulses of purely practical desires. Of course, science can start from the sensuous in its individuality and possess an idea of how this individual thing comes to be there in its individual color, shape, size, etc. Yet in that case, this isolated sensuous thing has as such no further bearing on the spirit. Inasmuch as intelligence goes straight for the universal, the law, the thought and concept of the object. On this account, not only does it turn its back on the object in its immediate individuality, but transforms it within. Out of something sensuously concrete, it makes an abstraction, something thought, and so something essentially other than what that same object was in its sensuous appearance. This, the artistic interest, in distinction from science, does not do. Just as the work of art proclaims itself qua external object in its sensuous individuality, and immediately determinateness in respect of color, shape, sound, or qua a single insight, etc., so the consideration of art accepts it like this too, without going so far beyond the immediate object, confronting it as to endeavor to grasp, as science does, the concept of this object as a universal concept. From the practical interest of desire, the interest of art is distinguished by the fact that it lets its object persist freely and on its own account, while desire converts it to its own use by destroying it. On the other hand, the consideration of art differs in an opposite way from theoretical consideration by scientific intelligence, since it cherishes an interest in the object on its individual existence and does not struggle to change it into its universal thought and concept. Now, it follows from this that the sensuous must indeed be present in the work of art, but should appear only as the surface and as a pure appearance of the sensuous. For in the sensuous aspect of a work of art, the spirit seeks neither the concrete material stuff, the empirical inner completeness and development of the organism, which desire demands, nor the universal and purely ideal thought. What it wants is sensuous presence, which indeed should remain sensuous, but liberated from the scaffolding of its purely material nature. Thereby, the sensuous aspect of a work of art, in comparison with the immediate existence of things in nature, is elevated to a pure appearance, and the work of art stands in the middle between immediate sensuousness and ideal thought. It is not yet pure thought, but despite its sensuousness, is no longer a purely material existent either, like stones or plants and organic life. On the contrary, the sensuous in the work of art is itself something ideal, but which, not being ideal, as thought is ideal, is still at the same time there externally as a thing. If spirit leaves the objects free, yet without descending into their essential inner being, for if it did so, they would altogether cease to exist for it externally as individuals, then this pure appearance of the sensuous presents itself to spirit from without as the shape, the appearance, or the sonority of things. Consequently, the sensuous aspect of art is related only to the two theoretical senses of sight and hearing, while smell, taste, and touch remain excluded from the enjoyment of art. For smell, taste, and touch have to do with matter as such and its immediately sensible qualities. Smell with the material volatility in the air, taste with the material liquefaction of objects, touch with warmth, cold, smoothness, etc. For this reason, these senses cannot have to do with artistic objects, for which are meant to maintain themselves in their ideal independence and allow of no purely sensuous relationship. What is agreeable for these senses is not sensuous relationship. What is agreeable for these senses is not the beauty of art. Thus art on its sensuous side deliberately produces only a shadow world of shapes, sounds, and sights. And it is quite out of the question to maintain that in calling works of art into existence. It is from mere impotence and because of his limitations that man produces no more than a surface of the sensuous, mere schemata. These sensuous shapes and sounds appear in art not merely for the sake of themselves and their immediate shape, but with the aim in this shape of affording satisfaction to higher spiritual interests. Since they have the power to call forth from all the depths of consciousness a sound and an echo in the spirit. In this way, the sensuous aspect of art is spiritualized, since the spirit appears in art as made sensuous. B. But precisely for this reason, an art product is only there insofar as it has taken its passage through the spirit and has arisen from spiritual productive activity. This leads on to the other question which we have to answer. namely in what way the necessary sensuous side of art is operative in the artist as his subjective productive activity. This sort and manner of production contains in itself, as subjective activity, just the same characteristics which we found objectively present in the work of art. It must be a spiritual activity which yet contains at the same time the element of sensuous immediacy. Still, it is neither on the one hand purely mechanical work, a purely unconscious skill in sensuous manipulation, or a formal activity according to fixed rules to be learnt by the heart, nor, on the other hand, is it a scientific production which passes over from the sensuous to abstract ideas and thoughts, or is active entirely in the element of pure thinking. In artistic production, the spiritual and the sensuous aspects must be as one. For example, someone might propose to proceed in poetic composition by first apprehending the proposed theme as a prosaic thought and then putting it into poetical images, rhyme, and so forth, so that now the image would simply be hung on the abstract reflections as an ornament and decoration. But such a procedure could only produce bad poetry, because in it there would be operative as separate activities what in artistic production has validity only as a undivided unity. This genuine mode of production constitutes the activity of artistic imagination. This activity is the rational element which exists as spirit only insofar as it actively drives itself forth into consciousness. Yet what it bears within itself, it places before itself only in sensuous form. Thus, this activity has a spiritual content, which yet it configurates sensuously, because only in this sensuous guise can it gain knowledge of the content. This can be compared with the characteristic mentality of a man experienced in life, or even of a man of quick wit and ingenuity, who, although he knows perfectly well what matters in life, what in substance holds men together, what moves them, what power dominates them, nevertheless has neither himself grasped this knowledge in general rules, nor expounded it to others in general reflections. What fills his mind, he just makes clear to himself, and others in particular cases always, real or invented, inadequate examples, and so forth. For in his ideas, anything and everything is shaped into concrete pictures, determined in time and space, to which there may not be wanting names and all sorts of other external circumstances. Yet such a kind of imagination rests rather on the recollection of situations lived through, of experiences enjoyed, instead of being creative itself. Recollection preserves and renews the individuality and the external fashion of the occurrence of such experiences, with all their accompanying circumstances, but does not allow the universal to emerge on its own account. But the productive fancy of an artist is the fancy of a great spirit and heart. The apprehension and creation of ideas and shapes, and indeed the exhibition of the profoundest and most universal human interest in pictorial and completely definite sensuous form. Now, from this, it follows at once that, on one side, imagination rests, of course, on natural gifts and talent in general, because its productive activity requires sensuousness as a medium. We do indeed speak of scientific talent too, but the sciences presuppose only the universal capacity for thinking, and thinking, instead of proceeding in a natural way, like imagination, precisely abstracts from all natural activity. And so we are righter to say that there is no specifically scientific talent in the sense of a merely natural gift, On the other hand, imagination has at the same time a sort of instinct-like productiveness, and that the essential figurativeness and sensuousness of the work of art must be present in the artist, as a natural gift and natural impulse, and as an unconscious operation, must belong to the natural side of man too. Of course, natural capacity is not the whole of talent and genius, since the production of art is also of spiritual, self-conscious kind. Yet its spirituality must somehow have in itself an element of natural picturing and shaping. Consequently, almost anyone can get up to a certain point in an art, but to get beyond this point, where art proper only now begins, an inborn higher talent for art is indispensable. As a natural gift, this talent declares itself, after all, in most cases, in early youth. Hegel either changed his mind on this subject or did not make himself clear. See page 28 above and the section on talent and genius below. Okay, as a natural gift, this talent declares itself, after all, in most cases, in early youth, and it shows itself in the driving restlessness to shape a specific sensuous material at once, in a lively and active way, and to seize this mode of expression and communication as the only one, or as the most important and appropriate one. And after all, an early technical facility, which up to a certain point is effortless, is a sign of inborn talent. For a sculptor, everything turns into shapes, and from early years he lays hold of clay in order to model it. In short, whatever ideas such talented men have, whatever rouses and moves them inwardly, turns at once into figure, drawing, melody, or poem. Thirdly, and lastly, the subject matter of art is in a certain respect also drawn from the sensuous, from nature, or in any case, even if the subject is of a spiritual kind, it can still only be grasped by displaying spiritual things, like human relationships, in the shape of phenomena possessed of external reality. 3. The aim of art. Now the question arises. Okay. Before we go into this, Didi, do you want to say anything or have any reflection?
No, I think this is interesting. Yeah. That's where he's talking about talent, natural born talent. I think, it's like anything in someone's nature, we're born with certain abilities sometimes, or gifts. So then, and it says it's like a compulsion, I suppose, like the artist that has this feels compulsion to paint or draw or something, or like, or a doctor that has that compulsion to heal people. I suppose that's part of someone's nature. Just trying to think what else they were talking about in terms of expression and sensuousness and yeah, I think it's nice. Anything you wanted to say?
Yeah. So it seems to me so far, in the beginning of the reading, he tried to clarify what art is by clarifying what it's not in the beginning,
Yeah.
by comparing it to science, where he said that the job of science is to look at nature and then really think about what is being observed and deduce universal principles or laws from the individual sense perceptions in nature. So, like, you drop the apple and it falls to the ground and you drop the pencil and it falls to the ground. An apple and a pencil seem to be completely different from each other, yet they both behave in the same way when you drop it out of your hand. So there must be something in common which is acting on both of them, and that's gravity. But that's not something that's immediately evident to just sense perception. That requires deeper mediated thought to understand.
Mm-hmm.
And doing that is science. But he said art is not looking to deduce universal principles from nature. He said, so he's saying art is to art, art is the first step out of nature towards spirit, because the human subjectivity is taking nature as perceived by spirit, and then portraying it in a sensuously beautiful way as per the vision of the artist. So that's one step out of nature because it's entering into finite spirit through the human. Yeah. So I think it's really important that he's very much like trying to show what art is in many different ways, as to just have a clear concept of, okay, so now what can we do with it? You know, that's the feeling I've been getting.
I think also he's talking about, I think it was a bit further back, we was talking about the intelligence behind, it's not just a mere observation of an object, or then it becomes into, the application of intelligence in art, and how you then applying that. What's your, it's saying here, now we're going into the aim of art. So I suppose, we could look at it in terms of consciousness, develop consciousness, and then how we're utilizing that nature and in art, or to not just a mere sensuous interaction. I think also it was talking about the production, like it's in one's nature to produce and to use imagination. So it's inherent, it's like an innate thing within the artist. But intelligence here is, I think, the big the big the question really, which takes something further than just art for art's sake, or a pretty picture, as they say. It's then going into more of the layers and the depths of what's being said, what's being conveyed.
I think that's the essential thing he's presenting, is that, okay, the aim of art. Now the question arises of what interest or end man sets before himself when he produces such subject matter in the form of works of art. This was the third point which we adduced on page 25 with regard to the work of art, and its closer discussion will lead us on at last to the true concept of art itself. If in this matter we cast a glance at what is commonly thought one of the most prevalent ideas which may occur to us, is the principle of the imitation of nature. According to this view, imitation as facility in copying natural forms just as they are, in a way that corresponds to them completely, is supposed to constitute the essential end and aim of art. And the success of this portrayal in correspondence with nature is supposed to afford complete satisfaction. This definition contains prima facie only the purely formal aim, that whatever exists already in the external world and the manner in which it exists there is now made over again as a copy. as well as a man can do with the means at his disposal. But this repetition can be seen at once to be a superfluous labor, since what pictures, theatrical productions, etc., display imitatively animals, natural scenes, human affairs, we already possess otherwise in our gardens, or in our houses, or in matters within our narrower or wider circle of acquaintances. And looked at more closely, this superfluous labor may even be regarded as a presumptuous gain. BB, which but this repetition can be seen at once to be, which falls far short of nature, For art is restricted in its means of portrayal and can only produce one-sided deceptions. For example, a pure appearance of reality for one sense only. And in fact, if it abides by the formal aim of mere imitation, it provides not the reality of life, but a pretense of life. After all, the Turks, as Mohammedans, do not, as is well known, tolerate any pictures or copies of men, etc. James Bruce, in his journey to Abyssinia, travels to discover the sources of the Nile, third edition, London, 1813, volume 6, pages 526 to 7. Hegel quotes from memory, and usually inaccurately, but here he has given the gist of the story accurately enough for his purpose. Okay, so James Bruce, in his journey to Abyssinia, showed paintings of a fish to a Turk. At first, the Turk was astonished, but quickly enough he found an answer. If this fish shall rise up against you on the last day and say, "You have indeed given me a body, but no living soul," how will you then justify yourself against this accusation? The prophet, too, as is recorded in the Sunnah, said to the women, Ami Habiba and Ami Selma, who had told him about pictures in the Ethiopian churches, "These pictures will accuse their authors on the day of judgment." Even so, there are doubtless examples of completely deceptive copying. The grapes painted by Zeuxis have from antiquity onward been styled a triumph of art and also of the principle of the imitation of nature, because living doves are supposed to have pecked at them. To this ancient example, we could add the modern one of Butner's monkey. Oh, I missed one example. Up here where it says the prophet too is, where it says the prophet too, as is recorded in the Sunnah. The note says the Sunnah is a body of traditions incorporating the history of Muhammad's life, and so is a sort of supplement to the Quran. And now here, to this ancient example, we could add the modern one of Butner's monkey. Butner's monkey. Says for Zeuxis, see Pliny Natural History, XXXV 36, JF, Blumenbach 1752 through 1840, told the story of an old fellow student of Linnaeus 1707 through 78 called.
Is it just further over the other side, I think. They're called Butner.
Called Butner, CW 1801, professor in Göttingen, who put all his money into books and acquired a copy of Roselle's books with colored plates, the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, etc. Okay. So, even so, there are doubtless examples of completely deceptive copying. The grapes painted by Zeuxis have from antiquity onward been styled a triumph of art and also of the principle of the imitation of nature, because living doves are supposed to have pecked at them. To this ancient example, we could add the modern one of Büttner's monkey, which ate away a painting of a cockchafer in Rosel's Insektenbelustigungen, amusements of insects, and was pardoned by his master because it had proved the excellence of the pictures in his book, although it had thus destroyed the most beautiful copy of this expensive work. But in such examples and others, it must at least occur to us at once that instead of praising works of art because they have deceived even doves and monkeys, we should just precisely censure those who think of exalting a work of art by predicating so miserable an effect as this as its highest and supreme quality. In sum, however, it must be said that by mere imitation, art cannot stand in competition with nature. And if it tries, it looks like a worm trying to crawl after an elephant. See, what is that? Why? If we have regard to the continual, though comparative, failure of the copy compared with the original in nature, then there remains over, as an aim, nothing but taking pleasure in the conjuring trick of producing something like nature. And of course, a man may enjoy himself in now producing over again, by his own work, skill, and assiduity, what otherwise is already there. But this enjoyment and admiration become in themselves the more frigid and cold, the more the copy is like the natural original, or they may even be perverted into tedium and repugnance. There are portraits which, as has been wittily said, are disgustingly like, and Kant, in his critique of judgment, in relation to this pleasure in imitation as such, cites another example, namely that we soon get tired of a man who can imitate to perfection the warbling of the nightingale. And there are such men. As soon as it is discovered that it is a man who is producing the notes, we are at once weary of the song. We then recognize in it nothing but a trick, neither the free production of nature nor a work of art, since from the free productive power of man we expect something quite different from such music, which interests us only when, as is the case with nightingales warbling, it gushes forth purposeless from the bird's own life, like the voice of human feeling. In general, this delight in imitative skill can always be but restricted, and it befits man better to take delight in what he produces out of himself. In this sense, the discovery of any insignificant technical product has higher value, and man can be prouder of having invented the hammer, the nail, etc., than of manufacturing tricks of imitation. For this enthusiasm for copying merely as copying is to be respected as little as the trick of the man who had learnt to throw lentils through a small opening without missing. He displayed his dexterity before Alexander, but Alexander gave him a bushel of lentils, and as a reward for this useless and worthless art. B. There's a note there. The source of this story I have been unable to trace. Now further, since the principle of imitation is purely formal, objective beauty itself disappears when this principle is made the end of art. For if it is, then there is no longer a question of the character of what is supposed to be imitated, but only of the correctness of the imitation. The object and content of the beautiful is regarded as a matter of complete indifference. Even if apart from this we speak of a difference between beauty and ugliness in relation to animals, men, localities, actions, or characters, yet according to that principle, this remains a difference which does not properly belong to art, to which we have left nothing but imitation, pure and simple, so that the above mentioned lack of criterion For the endless forms of nature leaves us, so far as the choice of objects and their beauty and ugliness are concerned, with mere subjective taste as the last word, and such taste will not be bound by rules and is not open to dispute. And indeed, if in choosing objects for representation we start from what people find beautiful or ugly, and therefore worthy of artistic representation, i.e., from their taste, then all spheres of natural objects stand open to us, and none of them is likely to lack an admirer. For among us, e.g., it may not be it might not be every husband who finds his wife beautiful, but he did before they were married, to the exclusion of all others too. And the fact that the subjective taste for this beauty has no fixed rule may be considered a good thing for both parties. If finally we look beyond single individuals and their capricious taste to the taste of nations, this too is of the greatest variety and contrariety. How often do we hear it said that a European beauty would not please a Chinese, or a Hottentot either? Since the Chinese has inherently a totally different conception of beauty from the Negroes, and his again from the Europeans, and so on. Indeed, if we examine the works of art from these non-European peoples, their images of the gods, for example, which have sprung from their fancy as sublime and worthy of veneration, they may present themselves to us as the most hideous idols. And while their music may sound in our ears as the most detestable noise, they on their side will regard our sculptures, pictures, and music as meaningless or ugly. Why? But even if we abstract from an objective principle for art, and if beauty is to be based on subjective and individual taste, we soon, nevertheless, find on the opposite side of art itself that the imitation of nature, which indeed appeared to be a universal principle, and one confirmed by high authority, is not to be adopted. It's not to be adopted, at least in this general and wholly abstract form. For if we look at the different arts, it will be granted at once that even if a painting and sculpture portray objects that appear to be like natural ones or whose type is essentially drawn from nature, on the other hand, works of architecture, which is also one of the fine arts, can as little be called imitations of nature as poetical works can, insofar as the latter are not confined, e.g., to mere description. In any case, if we still want to uphold this principle in relation to these latter arts, we would at least find ourselves compelled to take a long, circuitous route, because we would have to attach various conditions to the proposition and reduce the so-called truth of imitation to probability at least. But with probability, we would again encounter a great difficulty, namely in settling what is probable and what is not. And apart from this, we would not wish or be able to exclude from poetry all purely arbitrary and completely fanciful inventions. The aim of art must therefore lie in something still other than the purely mechanical imitation of what is there, which in every case can bring to birth only technical tricks, but not works of art. It is true that it is an essential element in a work of art to have a natural shape as its basis, because it displays in the form of an external and therefore also natural phenomenon. In painting, e.g., it is important study to get to know and copy with precision the colors in their relation to one another, the effects of light, reflections, etc., as well as the forms and shapes of their objects down to the last detail. It is in this respect, after all, that chiefly in recent times, the principle of the imitation of nature and of naturalism generally has raised its head again in order to bring back the vigor and distinctness of nature and art, and distinctness of nature and art, which had relapsed into feebleness and nebulosity. Or, on the other hand, to assert the regular, immediate, explicitly fixed sequences of nature against as a manufactured and purely arbitrary conventionalism, really just as an inartistic as unnatural into which art had strayed. But whatever is right enough from one point of view in this, whatever in this endeavor, still the naturalism demanded is as such not the substantial and primary basis of art. And even if external appearance in its naturalness constitutes one essential characteristic of art, still neither is the given natural world the rule, nor is the mere imitation of external phenomena as externally the aim of art. Okay, we can stop here, I guess, if that's okay with you, Didi. Pick up phone. Yeah, all right.
Sorry, I was on mute. I think we was talking. It's interesting how he's saying about like imitating nature, and also understanding, shape, color, all those things. It's like the starting point when you're learning, I suppose. You copy, you try this, you try that, but it's just the learning of it. I think as one develops as an artist, you're then using those elements and those ingredients to then create something more than just what you're seeing. A bit like, I don't know, if someone's learning to dance, they might learn certain steps until can learn the steps enough to go and create, interpret their own. So I think the progress of art, as one that's learning and developing into, again, I suppose you could go back to looking at their intelligence. So once you've learnt certain formalities, so copying nature just by copying nature might have its purpose in developing skill, but ultimately it's what do you do with that afterwards? Then what makes art rather than just mere imitation of something that's already beautiful?
I don't think Hegel would like Bob Ross.
No. Well, yeah.
Because I mean, because that's what the feeling I'm getting from Hegel is also that, like, even for someone who is an experienced artist in learning how to copy the proper shapes and the colors in relation to each other, and they're an expert in that, but still they're using that expertise and technical skill to just copy nature, even if it's, they do a really good job. Still,
I think then, but what makes great, because I was thinking while you're reading this about some great artists that have, some great land, because he's talking specifically about nature, so like landscape artists, and what makes great landscape artists. And I suppose it's, if you look at the essence of it, it's capturing God's creation in its splendor. So in a way, you're still looking at more of a higher spirit, even though it's just nature, because the artist has been able to identify or capture something in nature that's spectacular and magnanimous.
I think Hegel would be critical of those people too, though.
Yeah, I think he would be, because it's just still on one plane. It's still on just, you're just capturing nature, which is not, again, really using any deeper inner reflection of higher intelligence. It's just like regurgitating, and I guess it's essential. It's a sensuous thing, isn't it? People are still, the artists are still, conveying their
They're just prioritizing sensuousness
with nature, yeah, and the beauty of nature is centralized in a painting, which might make a landscape painting a good or not good, and its composition, and it's like you were saying earlier, its composition, its shapes, its colors, etc. But it's just that. There's nothing more. Like you said, it's just a trickery, just imitation, trickery, enhancement of something.
I
Um,
think he's trying to really advocate and encourage those who have some sincere spiritual inspiration to who also happen to have, like the talent of art to be an artist, to cultivate those concepts that whatever they are particularly inspired by in the spiritual domain, and then use that as the inspiration for the art and have that. Because I remember maybe last time we read or the time before that, he basically said that that concept, that spiritual concept, is the soul of the piece of art, and everything else about the art is just the body. Like some people have beautiful bodies, okay, but that's not what's making them alive. It's the
yes,
soul.
yeah,
It's the soul. Uh, you know,
yeah, yeah. I think so. Um, it's a lot of but I think it's we look back to the Gita, where in the Gita is saying, where Krishna is saying that whatever your nature is, utilize it for my benefit, for my satisfaction. So here I feel that Hegel is saying that, like, whatever your nature is, if you have a inborn talent for art, then go deeper and use that intelligently
yeah,
for the glorification of the Lord, essentially. How we're using that. So we all have a talent. We all were born with, you know, uh, what's the word? Skills or gifts or talents or leanings towards something. So how are we using that? It essentially doesn't matter whether it's art or mechanics or something, How are we intelligently utilizing how we interact with the world and our environment? Um, yeah, it's nice. It's good. Good reading, huh?
yes, for sure.
Reading. Mm.
Have you had any inspiration, artistic inspiration?
Yeah, no, from what we're talking about from before, absolutely. But and also inspired to, maybe try and put a nice talk together and somehow, but it would take some planning.
Hmm,
So in between my work and things, I'm hoping to do something and try and then deliver that somewhere
hmm,
amongst artists would be nice.
yeah.
So yeah,
You're back in London now, or are you still near?
I'm at the moment I've been traveling all over the place. So I have different work in different places. So at the moment I'm in Kent,
Okay.
uh, in a different part of Kent. So and
Huh.
then next week maybe in another part of Kent, and then backwards and forwards to London. So
Can you hear the waves from where you are?
no, I'm not by the sea here, but where I am in the other part of Kent, I can definitely. I'm literally right by the sea, but I'm inland a bit here. We have lots of snow,
Huh.
so we had snow a few days back, and it's just been really icy. So we have to be quite careful. But, yeah,
Uh,
big jumpers and scarves. How is the weather there?
it's pretty cold, but it hasn't snowed yet, though.
Okay, are they predicting snow or?
I mean, they warned a couple days ago, but it hasn't come, so it may
Mm,
come soon. Who knows? It's cold enough, so it definitely can come.
yeah, it could come. Well, be careful. Keep warm.
Yes, for sure.
Yeah. I think you're talking about inspiration actually, because one of the things is, how do you, when you're depicting something, how are you depicting it in a more decorative way? Decorative, I don't mean decorative as in more kind of away from. what we know to be real reality. So more stylized rather than realistic.
I see.
So which is the best format to convey a message or a conception?
You feel you have to choose that beforehand?
Yeah, I think the thing is, like, some artists, they have a particular style, so that you might get a landscape artist that paints in a certain way, or a portrait artist that paints in a certain way, or an illustrator that illustrates. So they might have one way of communicating in an artistic way.
Hmm.
But I've kind of over the years had many opportunities to develop different styles and different ways of painting.
Hmm.
So then I can do different things. I can do realistic painting or stylized painting, or more traditional style painting. So it's which way do you go forward with that? Because people like to read something in a way that is the same. It's a bit like someone who writes a book, a writer. You might have a writer that can just write children's stories, for instance. So if you have a writer that can then write maybe fictional or thriller, and then they can write comedy, for instance. So if they're going to do a series of works, it would have to tend to be a good idea if it's kept in the same format, so that people can.
There's some continuity or something.
Yeah, that's my thing, really. Oh, we'll see. Yeah.
Sorry. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Shripad Bhakti Madhava Puri Maharaj Ki Jai.
Yeah.
Jai Srila Prabhupada, Srila Guru Maharaj, Srila Guru Dev, Srila Acharya Dev, Srila Shanta Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Rupanuga Guru Varga Ki Jai.
Yeah.
Jai Nishringapuli Dham Ki Jai, Navadvip Dham Ki Jai, Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai, Baladev Subhadra Jagannath Dhruv Ki Jai. Ganga Mai, Yamuna Mai Ki Jai. Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai, Giri Govardhan Gupta Govardhan Dham Ki Jai, Sham Kund Radha Kund Ki Jai, Tulsi Devi, Bhakti Devi, Vrinda Devi Ki Jai. Jai Harinam Sankirtan Yagya Ki Jai, Scientific Sankirtan Yagya Ki Jai. Jai Princeton Bhaktivedanta Institute Ki Jai, Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Institute Ki Jai, Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Mat Ki Jai. Our glories to the assembled devotees Ki Jai, Srimati Pramapriya Devi Dasi Ki Jai.
Jai Krishna
Sama
Keshavada
Bhaktivedanta.
Prabhu Ki Jai. Thank you, Prabhu.
Gurudev. Thank you, Didi. Very nice to have your association.
And yours. I'll see you Saturday.
Yes. Hare Krishna.
Dhanyavad, dhanyavad, dhanyavad.
Dhanyavad pranams.